Welcome to our channel. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers so we can continue creating these romantic stories for you. So, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and activate the bell. The night that started it all did not seem extraordinary at first. It was the kind of evening the privileged youth of the university knew by heart, a private lounge tucked away in the most exclusive part of the city, filled with low music, expensive laughter, and the careless aura of people who had never truly known limits. Chandeliers glittered overhead, throwing soft golden light across velvet couches and polished marble floors. Crystal glasses clinked, designer perfume hung in the air, and everywhere there was a sense that the world belonged to them. They were the heirs and heiresses of fortunes built generations before, children raised in palaces rather than houses, familiar with luxury in the same way others were familiar with air. They did not ask whether something was possible, only whether it was entertaining. And when the boredom came, as it often did in their endless cycle of parties and indulgences, they turned to games. Not board games, not cards or dice, but dares, challenges, wagers designed to prove who among them was boldest, cleverest, or most reckless. That night, the conversation drifted lazily at first, carried by the hum of alcohol and ego. They teased one another, retold stories of past bets, who had kissed the stern professor's daughter just to win a bottle of champagne, who had broken into the rector's office only to leave a flower on his desk. Each tale was met with roars of laughter and self-congratulation, as though their antics were the stuff of legends rather than childish cruelty. But then, amid the boasting, a name slipped into the air. Her name. It was almost accidental, murmured by one of the girls who rolled her eyes and said, "If you really want a challenge, try her." The room quieted, not in shock, but in that sudden awareness that the idea was dangerous and therefore tempting. She was not like them. She did not attend their parties, did not linger in the corridors with whispers of gossip, did not trail laughter and perfume wherever she went. She walked with purpose, books clutched to her chest, eyes often lowered as though she were focused on a thought too deep to share. She wasn't unfriendly. People who spoke to her described her as polite, gentle even, but there was a distance in her, an invisible wall that separated her from the frivolity of everyone else. She belonged to the university, yes, but not to their world. To some, that made her boring. To others, it made her fascinating. To all of them, it made her untouchable. And nothing drew the attention of this group more than something, or someone, labeled as untouchable. "She's impossible," one of the boys scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "She wouldn't give any of us the time of day, doesn't even look at people." "Exactly," another chimed in, his grin sharp. "And that's what makes it perfect. Imagine someone actually managing to get her. That would be a victory worth remembering." The suggestion was cruel from the start. It wasn't about her as a person. It was about her as a puzzle, a mountain to be climbed, a prize to be claimed. They weren't thinking of her feelings or her trust, or the way she carefully carried herself like someone guarding something fragile. They were thinking of entertainment. The idea sparked like fire on dry leaves. Voices overlapped, laughter rose again, and in minutes the concept had turned into something solid, a wager. The rules formed quickly, each voice adding a condition, each laugh hardening the cruelty into something official. One of them would be chosen to pursue her, not just a casual flirtation, not just a meaningless date, but something more convincing. He would have to win her heart, make her believe in him, draw her out of the walls she had so carefully built. And once she believed, once she was certain, it would all be revealed. That it had started as a game, that her heart had been placed on the table like coins in a bet. Some of them hesitated. For all their arrogance, there were still lines that felt uncomfortable to cross, but hesitation was a dangerous thing in that group. To hesitate was to show weakness, and weakness was mocked until it was crushed. So the doubts were silenced, drowned in the noise of challenge and pride. And then came the moment of decision. Who would play? Eyes shifted across the room, searching for the one reckless enough, charming enough, careless enough to take it on. They landed, as they so often did, on him. He was the golden boy of their circle, not by wealth, though he had plenty of that, but by spirit. Where others bragged, he laughed. Where others schemed, he improvised. His charm was effortless, his smile infuriatingly confident, and his reputation one of invincibility. Professors scolded him, yet forgave him. Friends envied him, yet followed him. Girls admired him, yet never seemed to hold him for long. He was not cruel by nature, but he was careless in the way of someone who had never been forced to consider consequences. To him, life was a stage, and he was the actor forever improvising his next line. The choice was obvious. "You," one of them said, pointing a finger with a grin. "If anyone can do it, it's you." He raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. "Do what?" "Win her," another supplied. "The untouchable one. She's your next adventure." He laughed at first, shaking his head, but laughter in that group was dangerous too. It could turn into mockery if one refused a dare, and he, of all people, could not be seen as a coward. So he leaned back in his chair, swirled the wine in his glass, and said with a shrug, "Why not? It'll be fun." And just like that, the deal was sealed. Applause broke out, hands clapped against his back, and the wager became official. The reckless wager, born in a haze of luxury and boredom, had chosen its player and its victim. He drank to their cheers, grinning as though the whole thing amused him. But beneath the surface, somewhere deep where he would not admit it, something stirred. A sliver of curiosity, perhaps, about the girl he hardly knew. A whisper of wonder about what it would take to make her smile, to make her notice him. He brushed it aside, telling himself it was nothing but the thrill of a new challenge. Yet the whisper lingered. Across campus, she remained entirely unaware. She studied late into the night, the lamplight casting soft shadows across her desk. She walked the quiet paths beneath the autumn trees, her steps steady, her eyes lost in thought. She had no idea that strangers, laughing in a room of golden glass, had spoken her name like a dare. She had no idea her life was about to be altered by a boy who didn't yet realize how deeply this game would change him. For in matters of the heart, no bet is ever truly harmless. And when you gamble with love, you never know who will win or how much it will cost. The reckless wager had been made, and with it, a story had begun. A story of pride, of deception, and of a love that would grow in the most unlikely soil. He woke the next morning to sunlight spilling across his apartment floor, golden stripes stretching across the Persian rug, touching the chaos of his scattered clothes, books, and half-empty coffee cups. For most people, such a mess might have been embarrassing. For him, it was simply the aftermath of another night well lived. He stretched lazily, running a hand through his hair, and smiled at the faint echo of laughter still ringing in his mind. Their cheers, their teasing, the roar of approval when he raised his glass and accepted the challenge. The wager. For a moment he nearly laughed again. It had all felt so absurd in the glow of the club's chandeliers, a dare born out of boredom, a game for the rich and restless. But now, in the silence of morning, the weight of it pressed against his thoughts. He was supposed to win over the most reserved, most untouchable girl in the entire university, a girl he had never once spoken to, a girl who didn't belong to his world of glittering excess. And yet, the idea intrigued him. He leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling as the details of her drifted into his memory. He had noticed her before, though only in passing. The quiet figure moving across the campus courtyard with her books pressed close. The way her hair fell like a curtain when she bent to read. The calm precision of her steps, as if every movement had been measured. She had no reason to ever look at him, and she never did. For someone used to being the center of attention, that alone had been noticeable. Now she was no longer just a shadow on the edge of his world. Now she was a mission. He told himself it was all for fun, the way he told himself every dare was. But somewhere beneath the bravado, something unsettled shifted. This wasn't like stealing exam answers or sneaking into the swimming pool at midnight. This involved another person's heart. He pushed the thought away, because dwelling on it would only make the game harder. And he was not the type to lose. When he arrived at campus later that day, the whispers had already begun. His friends spread the story like wildfire, though never directly mentioning her name outside their circle. Still, there were eyes on him, watching, waiting to see if the golden boy could truly live up to his reputation. It wasn't just about him and her anymore, it was about the spectacle. He spotted her near the library, standing beneath the tall oak trees with her notebook in hand. She was writing something, he couldn't see what, and her brow was furrowed in concentration. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the world around her, didn't notice him watching. He felt a strange hesitation then, his usual easy stride faltering. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to say. And that was when he realized the truth. Charm had always been his weapon, but it might not be enough here. For she was not like the others who fell easily into his jokes and compliments. She was quiet, guarded, and there was something in her eyes, a seriousness, a depth, that told him she had no patience for games. If he was going to succeed, he would have to become someone different. Or at least, appear to. The thought made him grin. A challenge indeed. That evening he returned to his circle of friends, their laughter and anticipation filling the room like smoke. "So?" one of them asked eagerly. "Did you see her?" "I did," he replied smoothly, pouring himself a drink. "And she'll be mine soon enough." Their cheers rang out again, but behind his smirk, a sliver of doubt lingered. Not doubt that he could charm her, he believed he could charm anyone, but doubt about what it might do to him in the process. Days passed, and he began his quiet campaign. He didn't rush. He watched her first, observing her habits, the way she always chose the same table in the library, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was lost in thought, the way she paused before crossing the street as if considering something invisible. He began placing himself nearby, not intrusively, but enough to be noticed. A shared space here, a casual glance there. The first words he spoke to her were almost accidental. He had followed her into the library one rainy afternoon, pretending to search for a book near where she sat. When she reached for a volume on the top shelf, he stepped forward and pulled it down easily, handing it to her with that effortless smile of his. "Looks heavy," he said lightly. She blinked at him, surprised, but her voice was calm when she answered, "I could have managed." And just like that, she returned to her seat. No thank you, no smile, just quiet dismissal. For most people, that might have been the end of it, but for him, it was the beginning. He walked away that day not discouraged, but more determined. She hadn't fallen for the simplest trick, and that only made the game more intoxicating. Yet as he lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling again, he felt something unfamiliar. He replayed the brief moment when her eyes had met his, steady, unflinching, utterly unimpressed, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, it thrilled him. The chosen player had entered the game. But what he didn't yet know was that in choosing her, the game had also chosen him. Because soon, it would no longer be about a bet, or about pride, or about proving himself to his friends. Soon, he would discover that she wasn't the only one at risk of losing her heart. And when that day came, no wager in the world would be enough to protect him. The first approach was never meant to succeed. At least that's what he told himself afterward, replaying the brief, almost comical way she had dismissed him in the library. Her cool, measured response, "I could have managed," had been like a door closing softly but firmly in his face. Most people would have walked away, perhaps even felt embarrassed. But for him, that small rejection only confirmed what he already knew. This was not going to be easy. And the more impossible something seemed, the more irresistible it became. He decided then that his first mistake had been underestimating her. She wasn't someone who would melt at a smile or stumble over a charming line. No, she was steady, self-contained, someone who weighed people not by their words, but by their consistency, their truth. And so if he wanted to draw her attention, he would need to do something he wasn't used to doing at all. Slow down. That realization both unnerved and excited him. For the first time in years, he had to think about his every move, plan his steps, and resist the urge to rush toward victory. The next time he saw her, it was early morning. The campus was quiet, a thin mist drifting across the lawn as students hurried toward their classes. She was sitting beneath a tree with her notebook open, writing something quickly, almost urgently. He stopped a short distance away, watching her pen move across the page with precise strokes, her expression intent. For a moment he didn't approach. He simply observed, wondering what could hold her attention so tightly. What thoughts did she guard so closely that even the noise of the world couldn't disturb her? He wanted to know, more than he had expected. Finally he walked forward, his footsteps careful on the damp grass. She looked up when his shadow fell across her notebook, and her eyes narrowed slightly, not in hostility, but in mild irritation at being interrupted. "How you're always writing," he said softly, crouching slightly so he was closer to her level. "What is it, poems? Plans to take over the world?" Her lips pressed together, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she closed the notebook and said quietly, "Neither." It wasn't an invitation to continue, but it wasn't a dismissal either. That alone felt like progress. He smiled. "So it's a mystery then? I'll have to guess." She said nothing, only gathered her things and stood, brushing the grass from her skirt. With a nod that was more acknowledgement than farewell, she walked away. He stood there watching, his grin widening. 2 words, 2 small words, and yet they felt like a crack in the wall she had built. From then on, he began to appear more often, not by accident but with the precision of someone studying a pattern. He learned her schedule. She liked to study in the library on rainy afternoons. She lingered near the music hall at twilight, listening to the faint sound of practice sessions drifting from the rooms. She bought coffee from the same small cafe just outside campus, always ordering the same simple drink, never indulging in the extravagant flavors others loved. He began weaving himself into these places, but never forcefully. He sat at a nearby table in the cafe, reading a book he had barely opened, waiting for her to notice him. He lingered outside the music hall too, pretending to listen to the same notes she did. He began borrowing books from the same section of the library where she studied, pretending to struggle with the weight of them just to make her glance in his direction. It was subtle, patient work, so unlike the flamboyant conquests of his past, that his friends would have laughed had they seen him. But he told no one. Not because he feared mockery, but because, strangely, it felt different now. What had begun as a dare was already starting to feel personal. The first true conversation came on a day when the sky was heavy with clouds and the air smelled of rain. She was leaving the library with her arms full of books when the storm broke, sudden and violent. Students scattered, running for cover. She stopped under the library steps, staring at the sheets of rain falling across the campus. Her lips pressed together in frustration. That was when he appeared beside her, holding an umbrella. "You look like you could use this," he said, tilting it toward her. She glanced at him, her eyes unreadable. For a long moment she seemed to be weighing him again, as though deciding whether to trust the offer. Finally she nodded once and stepped under the umbrella. They walked together through the storm, the sound of rain drumming above them, the scent of wet earth rising around them. He wanted to speak, to fill the silence with jokes or questions, but something about her quiet presence kept him still. Instead, he matched her pace, steady and calm, and for once he let the silence stretch. When they reached her dormitory, she turned to him. Her gaze lingered for a moment longer than before, and though her voice was soft, it carried a weight that surprised him. "Thank you," she said simply. It was only 2 words again, but this time they were different, warmer, real. As she disappeared inside, he stood in the rain a little longer, the umbrella forgotten above him. For the first time since the wager had begun, his chest tightened with something unfamiliar. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't pride. It was something quieter, deeper, and infinitely more dangerous. From that day on, the approaches grew more frequent. A shared table in the cafe became a shared smile. A brief conversation about a book turned into an exchange of thoughts on music, on art, on the small details of life that most people ignored. She began to notice him, not the golden boy everyone admired, but the boy who listened, who remembered her words, who walked in silence beside her without needing to fill every space with chatter. And he noticed too how she slowly unfolded. Her laughter, when it came, was rare but genuine, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Her eyes softened when she spoke of the books she loved, the music that calmed her, the dreams she never shared with anyone else. Every step forward felt like victory, yet at the same time every step forward tightened the knot of guilt in his chest. For though he was playing the role perfectly, though he was following the path of the wager, he was no longer sure where the game ended and his own heart began. The first approaches had been small, almost insignificant, but together they built a bridge across the distance between them. And with every step he took toward her, he knew he was also walking farther away from the reckless laughter of his friends and deeper into something he could no longer call a game. Because the truth was becoming harder to ignore, he wasn't just approaching her, he was falling toward her. And when he finally realized it, it would already be too late to turn back. He had always believed he was immune to love, immune to attachment, immune to the fragile emotions that seemed to rule the lives of others. For years he had worn his reputation like armor, the charming heartbreaker, the untouchable player, the boy who never lost. Feelings, he told himself, were for the weak. Affection was just a tool, a stepping stone to get what he wanted. And love? Love was an illusion, a story written for people desperate to escape the harsher truths of life. But then came her. At first she was just another name thrown into the air on a careless night, another conquest, another challenge to prove that his charm could bend even the most unwilling heart. The wager had seemed harmless enough, insulting maybe, but harmless in the context of their games. He would make her fall, she would be another mark on his endless list of victories, and life would go on. Except it didn't. It started in the smallest ways. The first time he sat across from her in the library, pretending to be there by accident, he thought it would be easy. She barely looked up, her eyes fixed on the page in front of her, and when he spoke, her answers were clipped, polite, and distant. It should have frustrated him. Instead, it intrigued him. "Do you always read books thicker than a brick?" he had teased lightly, tilting his head toward the massive volume in her hands. She didn't even glance up. "Do you always interrupt people who are trying to focus?" The sharpness of her reply should have stung, but it didn't. It made him smile. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't met with a giggle or a flirtatious reply, but with resistance. Real resistance, and that resistance planted a seed. He began seeking her out, not because it was part of the wager, but because he wanted to. He found excuses to cross her path, to sit beside her in the cafeteria, to offer help with small things she didn't really need help with. Each time she pushed back, and each time he came back again, not out of stubbornness anymore, but because those moments with her stirred something he couldn't quite name. One evening, after weeks of persistence, she finally softened, just a little. She allowed him to walk her back from the library. The night was cool, the lampposts casting golden circles of light across the path. They talked, truly talked, for the first time. She spoke of her love for literature, of the stories that shaped her, of her dream to one day create something lasting. He listened. Not the way he usually listened, with half his attention wandering and a smirk waiting for its moment. He listened as if every word mattered, and for the first time in his life they did. The changes in him were subtle at first. His friends didn't notice immediately, but he felt them. He found himself growing restless during their usual games, distracted during parties, irritated by the shallow laughter that used to thrill him. He caught himself thinking about her in moments he shouldn't have, wondering what she was reading, whether she had eaten dinner, whether she was walking home safely at night. The wager began to feel distant, unimportant. In fact, the very mention of it began to sour his mood. One night, while the group sat around the same table where the reckless bet had begun, one of them leaned over with a mocking grin. "So, how's the Ice Queen? Has she thawed yet?" He forced a smile, but inside the words twisted like a knife. He wanted to snap at them, to tell them they didn't know her at all, to defend the girl who had no idea she was at the center of their cruel amusement, but he stayed quiet. Silence, he thought, was safer than revealing the storm building inside him. Later that night, alone in his room, he stared at the ceiling, a realization creeping over him with terrifying clarity. He didn't want this to be a game anymore. He didn't want to win a bet. He wanted her. Not for a victory, not for pride, but because every second with her felt more real than anything he had ever known. The shift grew stronger with each encounter. He remembered one afternoon vividly. They sat beneath a tree on campus, the sun filtering through the leaves, scattering shadows across the grass. She had agreed, hesitantly, to share her lunch break with him. While she ate, she pulled a book from her bag and read aloud a passage that had struck her. Her voice was soft, thoughtful, filled with emotion. When she finished, she looked up, almost embarrassed. "Sorry, I probably bored you," but he shook his head, his gaze steady. "No," he said quietly. "You didn't." And he meant it. Every word she spoke lingered in him long after she fell silent. Moments like these left him torn. With every step closer to her, his guilt deepened. How could he keep pretending this had started as anything but a cruel wager? How could he reconcile the truth with the feelings that had now taken root so deeply inside him? He tried more than once to tell her, to confess everything. But the words always caught in his throat. The fear of losing her, of seeing the trust in her eyes shatter, paralyzed him. So he stayed silent, and silence became his greatest betrayal. She too began to notice the shift. At first she had dismissed him as just another spoiled heir with too much charm and too little sincerity. But the more time she spent with him, the more she questioned that assumption. He wasn't what she had expected. He was attentive, thoughtful in ways that surprised her. He remembered the smallest details of their conversations, asked questions that showed he genuinely cared, and sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, his expressions softened in a way that felt unguarded, almost vulnerable. It scared her, because she had promised herself not to fall, not for boys like him, not for anyone who came wrapped in danger and arrogance. But the walls she had built around her heart began to crack, one conversation at a time, one walk under the stars, one shared laugh when she least expected it. And though she didn't admit it, not to him, not even to herself, she was beginning to feel something too, something she had long believed was not for her. One night defined everything. They had stayed late at the library, lost in conversation, until the world outside was quiet. As they walked, the sky stretched dark and endless above them, the air crisp and clear. When they reached her dorm, she turned to him, her hand lingering on the strap of her bag. "Why do you do this?" she asked suddenly, her tone hesitant. He frowned slightly. "Do what?" "Spend time with me," she said, her gaze steady, almost challenging. "You could be anywhere else, with anyone else." He opened his mouth, ready with some smooth reply, but stopped. For once, none of the old lines came to him. Instead, the truth tumbled out, raw and unpolished. "Because I want to," he said simply. She studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for something, anything that would betray him. But all she found was sincerity. And in that silence, something shifted between them. She didn't smile, she didn't reply, but she didn't turn away either, and that to him was enough. That night, lying in his bed, he realized he had crossed the line. The wager wasn't just reckless anymore, it was irrelevant. What he felt for her wasn't part of the game, it was beyond it, and that terrified him, because the truth was still there, like a shadow looming over everything they were building together. And he knew, deep down, that when it came out, as it inevitably would, it could destroy them both. But for now, in the fragile, fleeting moments they shared, he allowed himself to believe in her laughter, in her trust, in the warmth he felt when her eyes lingered on him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing victory. He was chasing something real, something he had never thought possible, and it was the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. Secrets are like cracks in glass, at first invisible, small enough to ignore, but always there, always waiting. And the longer they're hidden, the deeper they spread, until one day, under the slightest pressure, everything shatters. For weeks he had lived inside that fragile glass. Every moment with her was a contradiction, pure, honest, real, and yet poisoned by the lie that had birthed it all. Each time she smiled at him, each time her gaze softened, he felt both elated and haunted. Because he knew he was building something beautiful on a foundation made of sand, and sooner or later the tide would come. And it did. The truth didn't explode in some dramatic confession. It crept in slowly, like a shadow growing longer at dusk until it could no longer be ignored. It began with laughter. Not hers, never hers, but his friends. They were together at one of those endless parties, the kind he now attended reluctantly. She hadn't come with him. She had declined the invitation, as she often did, preferring the comfort of her books to the chaos of champagne-soaked nights. He had gone anyway, telling himself it was easier than explaining why he no longer cared for their games. But the night was a mistake. He was leaning against the bar, lost in thought, when one of his friends clapped him on the shoulder. "You've done it again," the boy said with a grin. "Didn't think even you could pull this one off." "Pull what off?" another chimed in, already smirking. "Come on, we all know the bet, the Ice Queen." They laughed, loud, careless, cruel. And though he didn't laugh with them, he didn't stop them either. What he didn't realize was that she was there. She hadn't planned to be. She had been dragged to the party by a friend who insisted she needed to live a little, that she couldn't hide behind her books forever. She had walked in reluctantly, already regretting the decision, when she heard her name carried on the current of laughter. She froze. She listened. And in that moment, the fragile glass shattered. The words cut deeper than any blade. A bet. That's what she was. Not a girl, not someone worth knowing, not someone he cared for, but a challenge, a joke, a reckless game. She didn't wait to hear more. She didn't need to. The pieces were already sharp enough. When he turned and saw her standing there, pale, her eyes wide and wounded, his chest collapsed in on itself. He knew instantly. He didn't need her to speak. Her silence screamed louder than anything else. "Wait," he said, pushing through the crowd toward her. "It's not... Please, let me explain." Her voice was quiet, trembling, but filled with steel. A bet? The word alone nearly broke him. He reached for her, desperate, but she pulled back as though his touch would burn her. The pain in her eyes was unbearable, and yet he couldn't look away. "It started that way," he admitted, the words spilling out, raw and frantic. "Yes, it started as a bet, but that's not what it is anymore. That's not what you are to me." She shook her head, tears brimming but unshed. "Do you think that makes it better?" Her voice rose, sharp and cutting now. "Do you think it matters that you changed your mind? You lied to me. From the beginning, every word, every smile. Was that all just practice? Just strategy to win your little game?" "No." His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. "It was real, I swear. It became real. You're not a game to me. You're the only thing that's ever been real." But she wasn't listening. Not anymore. The betrayal had carved too deep. She turned, her shoulders stiff, her steps hurried. He followed her out into the night, calling her name, begging her to stop. But she didn't look back. When she finally disappeared into the dark, the silence she left behind was suffocating. The days that followed were agony. She avoided him completely. Wouldn't answer calls, wouldn't reply to messages, wouldn't meet his eyes if they crossed paths on campus. The warmth that had once lingered in her gaze was gone, replaced by walls thicker than ever before. For the first time, he knew what it meant to lose. Not a game, not a wager, but something far greater, her. He tried everything. Notes slipped into her books, waiting outside her classes, silent apologies written across his expression every time their eyes accidentally met. But nothing reached her. And maybe, he thought bitterly, she was right. Maybe there was no explanation good enough, because how could he expect her to believe his love was real when it had been born from something so cruel? One night, unable to bear the weight of it any longer, he found himself outside her dorm. He hadn't planned what to say. How could words ever be enough? Still, he waited, hoping, praying for a chance. When she finally appeared, her arms full of books, her expression froze at the sight of him. "Please," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "just 5 minutes." She hesitated, torn between anger and something softer she didn't want to admit still existed. Against her better judgment, she nodded. 5 minutes. He took a breath, every word a blade in his throat. "I won't lie to you, it started as a bet. The worst mistake of my life. But somewhere along the way, It stopped being about that. It stopped being about winning or proving anything. You changed me. You made me care in a way I didn't think I could. I love you. I love. Her eyes flashed with pain. You don't get to say that, not after everything. But it's the truth, he said, his voice breaking. The only truth that matters now. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. She searched his face, perhaps looking for deceit, for cracks in his sincerity. But all she found was desperation. Still, her heart was too raw, too wounded. She shook her head, tears spilling this time. I can't, she whispered. I can't trust you. And with that she walked away again, leaving him standing in the cold, shattered in a way he never thought possible. The truth had been unveiled. The game was over. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't the victor. He was the one left broken, clutching at the shards of a love he had destroyed with his own recklessness. But even as he stood there, hollow and defeated, one thought refused to leave him. He couldn't give up. Not now. Not when he had finally found the one thing worth fighting for. Because love, he realized, wasn't about wages or victories. It was about redemption. And if there was even the smallest chance to prove himself, he would take it, no matter the cost. The days after the truth had been unveiled were the longest of his life. The world had continued indifferent, but for him, time had slowed to an unbearable crawl. Every campus corridor felt hollow, every smile of another student a reminder of what he had lost. He wandered through life as though moving underwater, every breath heavy, every step echoing the absence of her presence. He had known loss before, but never like this. This wasn't about pride or money or a failed gamble. This was about her, the girl whose laughter had become the rhythm of his heart, whose glance had become the anchor of his restless soul. And he had shattered the trust between them before it even had a chance to flourish. Yet even in that despair, a stubborn ember burned within him. Love like this didn't fade quietly, and neither did he. He knew that if he wanted her back, he couldn't simply apologize. Words alone had failed her before. He needed actions, proof that his feelings were real, proof that he had changed, proof that the love he now carried was more than a fleeting mistake. He began in small ways. He noticed her routine, the little things she didn't think anyone observed, the quiet corner of the library she preferred, where the light fell just so on the pages of her book, the small coffee shop she visited on Tuesday mornings, always ordering the same drink, the way she always walked home along a tree-lined path, headphones in, lost in music. And he followed, quietly, not to spy, but to be present, to protect, to prove that he could care for her without needing her to notice immediately. He began leaving small notes, each carefully folded and slipped into the books she returned to the library shelves. At first, they were simple. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I understand if you can't forgive me yet. Gradually, the notes grew more personal, reflecting the genuine admiration and affection he felt for her. But even these small gestures carried risk. Every time she read one, she looked over her shoulder, scanning the room for the sender. And every time she didn't see him, her brow furrowed, conflicted emotions twisting within her. She wanted to be angry, she wanted to protect herself, but there was also that spark, the undeniable memory of his presence, when he had truly been sincere, when he had shown her the side of himself that was real. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon, the kind of rain that drummed a rhythm on the sidewalks and washed the world in muted grey. She was rushing to a lecture, her bag heavy with books, her umbrella failing to shield her from the downpour. He appeared as if by instinct, holding an umbrella large enough to shelter them both. She hesitated, her anger flaring even as her body leaned toward the shelter he offered. I don't want to talk, she said, voice tight. I don't need to talk, he replied softly. I just need to be here. Let me show you that I mean what I say. That moment, simple and quiet, was a turning point. The rain pattered around them, a backdrop to the tension and raw emotion that filled the narrow space under the umbrella. No games, no wagers, only two hearts, raw and exposed, navigating the fragile terrain of trust and forgiveness. And so they walked side by side, letting the silence speak, letting presence speak, letting the rain wash away the past. Over the next weeks, their interactions began to change. She started noticing him, not as the boy who had once dared to win her heart for sport, but as someone genuinely devoted to making amends. He remembered small details about her, her favorite flower, the passages in books that made her pause, the way she liked her coffee just so. He listened in ways he hadn't known he could, and he acted in ways she hadn't known he would, helping without being asked, supporting without demanding acknowledgement, showing patience when once he might have been impatient. Each act was deliberate, yes, but also instinctive. He didn't need the wager anymore. It had become meaningless. What mattered was her trust, her heart. And slowly, impossibly, she began to soften. The first real breakthrough came on a quiet evening in the campus gardens. Autumn leaves scattered in the breeze, painting the pathways with gold and crimson. She had agreed, hesitantly, to meet him, though neither spoke of why. "I don't know if I can trust you yet," she said after a long silence. "You hurt me, but I know," he whispered, "and I deserve that. More than that, I deserve that you doubt me. But I'm asking for a chance, not to erase the past, but to prove that I've changed. That what I feel for you is real." Her eyes studied him, searching for lies, searching for the old arrogance she had once despised. But she found none. Only sincerity, only a heart that had been reckless but had learned its lesson through the ache of loss. "I don't want to be hurt again," she said softly, almost to herself. "And you won't be," he promised. "Not if I can help it, not if I have anything to say about it." She took a hesitant step closer, letting her hands brush against his. The warmth of her touch sparked something deep inside him, a mix of relief, love, and a fragile hope that the impossible could still happen. The next weeks were a delicate dance. Trust had to be rebuilt, step by step. They shared quiet moments, coffee breaks, walks beneath the trees, laughter over small jokes. They spoke honestly about fears, about hopes, about the past that had almost destroyed them, and gradually the walls between them fell away. It wasn't instant. There were moments of doubt, of anger, of insecurity, but each time they faced it together. And with every trial, every challenge, every shared sunrise and whispered word in the dark, their connection deepened. He showed her a side of himself he had never shown anyone: vulnerability, patience, humility. She showed him a side of herself she had rarely revealed: playfulness, warmth, courage. Together, they began to redefine love, not as conquest or wager, but as partnership, as respect, as a choice to care for another despite the risks. The final act of redemption came quietly. One night, beneath the stars, he took her hand. "I can't promise that life will be easy," he said. "I can't promise that the world won't try to hurt us. But I can promise this. I will never play games with your heart again. I will never lie to you. I will fight for us every day for as long as you'll let me." Her eyes glistened with tears, but this time they were tears of trust, of hope, of love reborn. I believe you," she whispered. And with that, he leaned down and kissed her. A kiss that was not about triumph or victory, but about forgiveness, about the promise of something real, something lasting, something worth every risk. From that moment on, the wager ceased to matter. It had been a spark, reckless and cruel, that had ignited a fire neither of them expected. But love, real love, had grown from it, defying games, defying ego, defying fear. They walked forward together, hand in hand, carrying both the memory of mistakes and the promise of redemption. Every glance, every touch, every shared laugh reminded them that love was worth fighting for. Not because it was easy, but because it was rare, fragile, and utterly irreplaceable. And in the end, that was enough.